Welcome to the Healthcare Security Cast, the podcast dedicated to healthcare security, safety, and emergency management. If you are involved with a healthcare security program or desire to be, this podcast is for you. Join the conversation as we discuss the issues that matter to healthcare security professionals while leveraging the expertise of healthcare security thought leaders and experts in personal development. And now, here's your host, Brian Hamilton.
Welcome to episode 111 of the Healthcare Security Cast. Today is our sponsor spotlight edition, brought to you exclusively by Genetech. And our guest today is Nada Ebeid. Nada shares some insights on how to deliver a better patient and hospital staff experience. And now, let's get into the discussion. Today, we're joined by Genetech Business Development Manager, Nada Ebeid. Nada, thanks for joining us today.
It's my pleasure, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks for coming on. And, I know you pretty well myself, but would you care to introduce yourself to everyone else?
Yeah, I welcome the opportunity. So I've been working, as Brian said, my name is Nada Ebeid. I've been working at Genetech for 5 years now. So I have to say I've been in the security industry for a whole of 5 years. So it's been a very exciting ride. I've been doing business development for the part of 3 years now, focusing on very specific industries in Canada. So I don't cover all of Canada, but, I do focus on very specific industries, healthcare being one of them, but I do cover a couple of others. I tend to think that my background is interesting because I don't necessarily come from the security industry. I come a little bit more from the telecommunications industry. So it does give me a different perspective. And, I continue to learn every day about security, and it's a fascinating field. So I'm really happy to be here with you today, Brian.
Awesome. Well, I guess we'll start off by just talking about healthcare security in general, because like you said, you've been in the security industry, you've been involved with it for the last 5 years. Was there anything that surprised you about the role of security in hospitals? And, from your perspective, what is that role?
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up, Brian, because, before I started covering healthcare, you look at security sometimes holistically and everything, and obviously it's a part of our day to day, but I don't think I, as a user of a hospital, ever realized how intrinsic security professionals are in actually ensuring that there's proper patient care in a hospital, and so actually learning about that and realizing that it really brings quite a bit of gravitas to that profession. And I think a lot of people do not realize how complex a hospital environment is from a security perspective and how many different aspects need to be considered, whether it be patient safety, visitor safety, but also let's talk about asset security and logistics. And if any one of these actually breaks in the link, there's a considerable impact, and that impact is actually patient care. So I think for me, actually not having been in the security industry my whole life, it definitely was an aha moment, and it gives a huge amount of respect. I have a huge amount of respect for security professionals in the healthcare environment.
Awesome stuff. So one of the other issues that, it's a big issue for our industry is workplace violence. So as an industry, how do we respond to healthcare issues and workplace violence?
Yeah, it's, I don't need to repeat myself, but, I have to admit that when I started looking at the healthcare industry, within the security element, of course, realizing the amount of violence that there was a bit of a surprise. I really did feel that it was a bit of a best kept secret. And actually, when I realized that, personally, I've been talking about it very, very openly in the past several years, because I actually think it's a detriment to all of us if this best kept secret doesn't come out in the open. And I'm sure for people that are very much within the industry, within the healthcare environment, they may not realize that it is a best kept secret, but I think once you get out of that healthcare environment, you realize that not a lot of people realize. And I think when you don't know, then it becomes very, very difficult to have actions, initiatives that are put in place, or even accepted initiatives within the environment. And maybe I'm being a bit vague there, so I'll go in and give a real life example. When you realize that video wearable solutions could actually deter violence, if you don't know of, how important the violence is actually in our healthcare environment, you may, get blocked off at the issue of privacy, and you'll say, no, there's an issue of privacy, and I don't want to accept this kind of solution in my environment. But when you actually realize that a nurse is actually 3 times more likely than a police officer or correctional officer to take time off because of violence, you may want to rethink that, your initial reaction. And you may want to take a step back and actually come to the table and say, okay, well, if I have a solution to help deter violence, how can I work through the challenge of privacy and make it acceptable for everybody involved, right? So I guess, my answer to that, I think we really need to listen to what are the real life challenges within hospitals, and make sure that there's awareness to it and sensitization to it, so that everybody could come to the table and bring solutions.
Right, and you brought up a very good point there. And one thing I'll say, just to speak to your point, yeah, it's definitely a real thing that people don't understand, the level of violence that happens in a healthcare facility. When I used to tell people I did security in a hospital, the question I would get a lot of times, most often actually, was, why do you need security in a hospital? So, there's a stark contrast between the perceived reality versus the reality of the environment.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah.
And the other thing that you mentioned there were when you were talking about wearables, were privacy issues. And, I'd like to dive a little bit deeper into that, because I know that's a big concern for a lot of my peers who really want to bring in these wearable solutions, but they're worried about privacy concerns. So what are some of the ways that you've seen those privacy concerns addressed?
Yeah. I think it has to do with understanding that, there are cameras anywhere. The cameras are there, right? And the reality is that the privacy of the footage is only shared, or the footage, I should say, is only shared when required, right? Because there is an actual incident. So the fact that it is a wearable or not, from my standpoint, it's a bit of here or there, right? The question is privacy, and how do you address that? And that's where you need to be able to protect the privacy of those that are not concerned with the incidents, because those are the privacy of the people that you're trying to protect. And for the actual individuals that were part of an incident, well, that information needs to be shared only with the appropriate people and authorized people. So the way, I think the best way to approach this is, one, making sure that there's proper procedures and how this technology needs to be used. But more than that, you need to make sure that there are tools available to help mask the faces of individuals that should not be shown, and that you can make sure that when you're actually sharing this footage with either internal stakeholders or external stakeholders, that you can really control who's having access to that information. You're able to audit it, you're able to trace it, and really have a proper control. So I think, there are solutions out there. There are ways of doing it. I think it's about understanding the pros and the cons of technology like that, and realizing that there's actually a lot more pros to it, and that there is a proper way of implementing it that is safe for everybody.
Right. Excellent stuff. Now, in terms of the just looking for operational efficiencies, what are some of the ways that healthcare security professionals can leverage their platforms to look for those efficiencies and their security processes as well beyond that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's a very important topic, because I think it has a lot to do with the unification of the different security systems in the hospital, right? At the end of it, I think it has a lot to do with situational awareness, being able to know what's happening where, and not having to scramble through 10 different screens or 3 different software applications to try to identify what's happening, right? So I think if we're able to help the operators minimize the time that they have to put in to figure out what's happening exactly and where that incident may be taking place, and reducing the time that they could spend in the investigation of incidents, then we're really freeing up these operators, these security professionals, to focus on what's actually happening within the hospital. So it really comes down to unifying the space as much as possible for the operators, minimizing the different interactions between systems, kind of putting that at the back end for the operator, so that they could really focus and hone in on the issues very, very quickly. So I think it really comes down to the unification of systems, minimizing the systems, but also making sure that we can improve the situational awareness for the operators.
That's great. That's a great answer, and it brings up another point too that I'm curious to know, and I can speak to this a little bit myself as a previous customer when I was working in a healthcare facility, a couple of healthcare facilities actually where we use Genetec solutions. But one thing that I can say is Genetec is really good for listening to customer feedback and developing solutions based on that. Can you talk to us a little bit about what happens in the back end in order to execute that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and to be honest, it's one of the things that I love the most about Genetec. It's fascinating to me. I mean, even when I joined the company, I came in the company where I think we were about 800 people. When we look today, we're over 1,600 people. 1,600 people. And nevertheless, you see this collaboration between the teams. And when there are customer issues, because those always happen. We're very, very close to the customers and addressing, as best as we can. So how it happens in the back end, it really stems from the leadership that we have in the organization, but also really organizing us in smaller teams so that we could, even though the company grows, when we're actual smaller teams focusing on healthcare, for example, then we could be extremely reactive. The other thing too, I mean, for us, we're not about, let's build it and, if we build it, they will buy it. We're really, really about our mission. And our mission is really to help, our societies live in a much healthier way and improve the flow. So I know that sounds, maybe high level there, but when you come down to it, it really ends up by bringing value to our customers. So for us, we're extremely, we prioritize a lot the voice of the customer so that we can bring that feedback right there, so that at the end of the day, the customer feels that they've influenced the product for themselves. So,
no, it's definitely an important piece. Now, when we're looking at implementing new technology into our facilities, what are some of the important things for us to consider?
Yeah, I think this, what I'm seeing, even throughout the last 3 to 4 years, is a huge increase in awareness of the value of open technology versus closed and proprietary. I remember when I started talking about it 3 years ago, it seemed a little bit less known as a benefit to customers and organizations in general. And 3 years in, I actually see that the increase in the awareness, and I see that people talk about it themselves. So to answer your question, I think anybody can resonate with this, is that 15 months ago, I don't think anybody could have guessed that we would have a pandemic that would keep us, in a virtual world for 15 months, right? So when you think about that and you take a pause and you think about that, you think, well, that means that 15 months ago, there were certain types of sensors or ITs or analytics that did not exist, right? A lot of those solutions were repurposed in many cases, but also there were new solutions that came out in the market, right? And I think the best way to make sure that you put in a technology strategy in your organization is to make sure that your baseline is solid. And the only way to have a solid baseline is to actually adopt a strategy of open architecture and open technology. Because we don't know what's going to come up in 3, 5, 10 years, right? There is going to be new technology. There is going to be new hardware. There's going to be new threats and new technology to address those threats. How do you consume that? And the only way of really being able to do that efficiently and leveraging, the worldwide, ecosystem is actually by having an open architecture so that you could bring in that new technology easily. If you look at it from a flip side, when you're working with closed and proprietary systems, then you're really, really limited to that organization's roadmap. And if there is a new threat or a new type of IoT or sensor or analytic or whatnot that comes out in the market, that organization may not have had, the pulse on it. They may not have a solution for it. And now you end up by really being stuck with that organization's roadmap. When you adopt an open architecture strategy, then you're not limited to any one organization's roadmap. You're actually leveraging everybody in the ecosystem.
It's a really good point, and there is not too much worse than making a sizable technology investment and then it being obsolete really quickly.
Exactly. So when you think about security systems, there's always a software component, there's always a hardware component. And the reality is software can evolve a lot easier than hardware. Hardware, will have an end of life at some point, will become obsolete, and so on. And so how do you adopt a strategy to allow you to follow, the new hardware that may come on in the market? And so, really the best answer to that is to have a solid software strategy that will allow you to consume different hardware as they become available. And if you could do that efficiently, then you could evolve really, really quickly. We saw it ourselves in the past, 15 months or so. Customers that already had that open architecture strategy were able to adapt really quickly to the reality of the pandemic, change access rules remotely, and whatnot, right? Those who didn't or had partial open architecture strategies struggled a lot more. Spent a lot more resources and time to adapt to the reality of having, to change the rules of the game, right? So, so open architecture honestly is that has to be the bottom of the pyramid in terms of the strategy that you put together.
Absolutely. Now, I want to kind of shift gears into looking at parking, because a lot of our leaders they do have oversight of parking as well. So what are the impacts of non-compliance with parking rules, and how could this affect hospital profitability or the ability to reduce operational debt?
Yeah, that's honestly, it's for me, it's a really interesting topic, because I think most people don't realize of the number of parking violations that there are in parking lots in general, but also within hospitals, right? So
Right.
There's a huge amount of parking violations. Personally, I don't understand it because, I pay my tickets, or pay my due, but it does happen. And we actually did a test with a hospital where we measured the number of parking violations that they had. So we leveraged our license plate recognition to do that. And we were actually able to demonstrate that there was 12% of parking violations, right? So 12%, what does that amount to, right? So when you actually turn that into dollars and cents, we were actually able to prove that by reducing the parking violations by 12%, we were able to put $600,000 annually back in the pockets of the hospital. So when you think of our hospitals and the public nature of them, right, they're operating on a lot of debt. So if you're able to generate $600,000 of revenue, that goes down directly to their bottom line and helps reduce the debt. So it's, I think it's actually a security tool as well. Making sure that you have authorized vehicles, or making sure that you could, eliminate unwanted cars from your properties. But, on the flip side, it could also help you operate your hospital in a much smarter way.
Awesome. And actually, let's just park there for a second. Just in terms of LPR, I'd like to actually go into that a little bit deeper and just talk about some of the specific functionality that you see healthcare facilities using with that technology.
So for LPR in particular, yeah. So it really comes down to two things, right? It's really about, the security aspect of it. So being able to have a white list, for example, or a black list of unwanted vehicles that you could detect. So if they were to come on your premise, you could notify the operators that these unwanted vehicles are on your premise. There's also the reality that there could be a lot of stolen cars as well. So through a collaboration with the police entities, it is possible actually to have information of stolen vehicles and to be able to detect them if they're left on your property. So that, really helps reduce crime within the communities. So it really is a security feature in many ways. But by leveraging, the same technology, you could actually also measure, when a vehicle comes onto your premise and when they leave, and make sure that the individuals actually paid for their time that they spent there. So it's really about parking enforcement, parking management enforcement, as well as a security feature for itself.
Excellent stuff. Now, we've covered a lot of topics. We hit on a couple of things. Is there anything that I haven't asked you yet that I probably should have, that we should maybe discuss a little bit further?
Let me think about that. I guess, one point that I'll make is that, And it's not limited just to hospitals. I think it's in a lot of different organizations that are adopting a lot of new technology in their environments or eager to add different types of sensors or IoTs in their environment. One thing I do need to bring to the table is, I spoke about earlier, how can we help operators hone in on an issue, on a location, a situational awareness much quicker, right? Or reduce their time of investigation. Part of the reason why I'm saying that is because there is the reality of alarm fatigue for operators. So I think, as we consider how we bring in more technology in our hospitals, we also need to think about the impact of those technologies and how we can actually help our operators have less alarms or less alarm fatigue so that they could actually manage their environment. So the best way of doing that is really by having correlation engines, incident management tools to actually be able to distinguish between nuisance alarms and real incidents that they need to address. So I guess maybe that's one thing, I would say is that we have to be mindful of how we adopt new technology, but there is a way of putting more technology in our environments, but we have to be smart about it and make sure that we're not overloading the operators because that could be counterintuitive.
Awesome stuff. Now, in terms of Genetec, aside from having you back on in a couple months, what else can we look forward to?
Oh, so Genetec always comes up with new exciting stuff. So, there's, obviously from an analytics perspective, we're pushing really hard on that. Cloud in general. So I think, cloud and hybrid cloud architectures is becoming more of, much more accepted within the security industry, especially from a hybrid perspective. So, Genetec's coming up with, continues to develop that hybrid strategy to make it easier for our customers to adopt. But, obviously, analytics and automation is a huge part of our developments in the next couple of months. So a lot of things to look forward for. Of course, cybersecurity, we're always continuing to develop our tool sets there as well. So there's really a lot of exciting stuff.
Awesome stuff. Now, as we wrap up, do you have a special message you'd like to share with the Healthcare Security Cast community?
Well, I would like to say that I've been very humbled to understand the environment a lot more, I kind of said a lot of these comments earlier, it does give a huge amount of gravitas to the role. So I really want to say thank you. And that, your efforts are extremely important for our societies. So it's extremely appreciated. And, I just hope that we could all be a part in making it easier for them.
Excellent. And then for anybody who wants to reach out to you directly or to connect with Genetec, what are the best ways to do so?
Great question. So, I'm on LinkedIn, so Nada Ebeid. Feel free to send me an email as well. I don't know if we have somewhere we could post that, but so we'll post that, I guess, in the chat or somewhere, but it's nebeid@genetec.com. But probably the easiest way would be on LinkedIn. Just connect with me and it will be my pleasure to connect with you back.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time today, Nada. I appreciate it. And as always, I appreciate your insights.
Thank you so much, Brian. Thanks for everything.
The Healthcare Security Cast is available on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music and Audible, and many other platforms as well. Check out our Linktree on your computer or mobile device. And this can be found at linktree/Brian Hamilton. That's linktr.ee/Brian, B-R-I-N-E, Hamilton. Again, that's linktr.ee/Brian Hamilton. Or if it's easier, send me a text at 647-372-2042. That's 647-372-2042. And I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have or share any insight. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, take care.